like to say good morning to all of you joining us today. We have participants from the Mines and Geosciences Bureau Region 2. Our friends from Philippine Ino Corporation is here with us as well. We have delegates from the Department of Science and Technology. Our team from Ferrotech is also joining this program. We also have participants from Bohol Environment Management Office. Good morning to all our friends from Bukidnon National High School, Cebu Micro Electronics Inc. We also have delegates from the Department of Education Batangas, the Zamboanga del Norte Electric Cooperative, Polytechnic University of the Philippines, the local government unit in Bacnotan, the National Irrigation Administration, FEC here in Cebu, Surface Technology, Miss Janice and the team from the provincial government of Misamis Occidental. We also have, by the way, participants from South Africa and Singapore tuning into us. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining this program today on ISO 14001-2015. This is our short agenda for this morning. We're going to talk about what is ISO 14001. As you have already seen, this is the environmental management system. Let's take a look at the requirements, by the way. ISO 14, like I said, is an environmental management system. It also has unique requirements in terms of how do we comply and implement this, what we call EMS. I'll also share with you how we can integrate your ISO 14001 to the ISO 9001. And of course, lastly, we're going to talk about how do we plan these environmental aspects and how do we identify all these environmental aspects that we have, assess what's the impact of these different aspects. Feel free to ask questions also, by the way. You may type your questions if you have in the group chat. I have my colleagues here in AGF. We have Jemrad, Shaira, Clement, Reggie. They're all here in the group chat. So please feel free to type your questions. I'll do my best to answer your questions later at the end of my presentation. So let's begin. Let's first define what is EMS. This is ISO 14001. As you can see in this definition, ISO 14001, or we call it Environmental Management System, is basically same with your QMS. It's also a set or collection of business processes. So it's composed of different procedures, and the purpose of these procedures is, number one, to manage your environmental aspects. So when we design the processes in your EMS, the purpose of that is for your organization to manage your environmental aspects. I'm going to talk about what are environmental aspects later on. Second, of course, is so that your organization will have a systematic way of fulfilling compliance obligations. You would see in the standard that it's very particular as well about legal, regulatory, statutory requirements. So we all know there are several legal laws that you need to comply with when we're implementing environmental management system. These processes are designed for you to address your environmental risk and opportunities. EMS is also anchored on three basic pillars, the first of which is improvement. Of course, your goal as an organization, whether you're public or private, is to continuously improve the way you handle your waste, your recycling programs. You have to continuously improve your environmental compliance. Second is that of prevention. You have to be diligent in making sure that you constantly identify environmental aspects. So you'll see later on that you have many activities that, without you knowing it, that interacts with the environment. I'll walk you through that. Our goal here is to prevent especially adverse effect of your activities, whether it's operation, whether it's purchasing, whether it's maintenance. It has its adverse effect to the environment. So our goal here is to be able to prevent these negative effects or risk or impacts of our activities to the environment. Another very important pillar here is compliance. You'd like to become a socially responsible entity, ensure sustainability for future generations. So these are three very important foundations of ISO 14001. The requirements you will see later on are based on this. If you recall, in your QMS, you have your 7 quality management principles, right? From customer focus to supplier management. Here in ISO 14001, this is basically your foundation. The requirements are all anchored in this: improvement, prevention, compliance. Now, speaking of requirements, these are the requirements. This is basically the same requirements as that of the QMS. The intention of ISO is to make sure that all of these different standards can be easily integrated. Organizations can already adapt to different ISO standards. Organizations right now will no longer just adapt to one standard or implement one standard. Instead, they actually integrate these different standards into one, and hence they call it integrated management system. Most organizations would implement an IMS, that's integrated management, which is composed of the quality, environment, health and safety, and information security. The identical structure of EMS is also similar to that of your QMS. And having said that, it is easy to integrate this EMS into your QMS. Of course, there are unique, very specific elements here for EMS, but in general, if you look at them, they're the same. So you will see later on in clause 6 and clause 8 and clause 7, there may be unique elements there for EMS, but in general, the structure of the EMS and QMS is one and the same. You can easily integrate that. So if you're an organization right now with an existing existing QMS or you're certified to 9001, and if you're planning to add 14001 into the system, you may easily integrate 14,000 there. Now, if you don't have any ISO certification yet, then it's even easier because you will start with a clean baseline. You can either start with 14,001 or start with 9001. Let's put all these requirements in a PDCA cycle, similar to what we're doing with our QMS. So if you put this in a PDCA cycle, it would look like this. So again, your ISO 14001 PDCA cycle, when we say PDCA, this is plan, do, check, act. So of course, you first have to plan the system, implement the system, audit the system, and improve the system. The requirements are there starting from clause 4 on the left side of your screen up to clause 10, which is improvement on the bottom side of the screen. You have to run through the process so that you get the results of your QMS on the right side of the screen. So again, input, process, output. The input would be context of the organization, which is clause 4. The process would be the plan, do, check, act in between. The output would be the results of your EMS. Today, our focus will be on clause 6. As you can see, clause 6 right there is just one of the many elements. Clause 6 is planning. Clause 6 planning talks about specifically the environmental aspects. So if you go to 6.1, specifically 6.1.2, environmental aspect, we'd like to understand first what are environmental aspects and what are environmental impacts. For example, this is your organization. Let's put your company at the center of this management system. Your organization, regardless of type, size, nature of your business, you use this, right? You use these resources. You use water. You use energy. You use natural resources. You need supplies. You need all these resources for you to be able to deliver your products and services, right? Whether you're a service-oriented organization or you produce a product, you use all these resources. When you use all these resources, what happens is that your organization contributes to this, generating wastewater, generation of solid, if not even toxic waste, or contamination of land, or maybe possible water contamination by just simply operating as a business. We need to use resources to deliver products and services, and in so doing, we create an impact affecting water and so on and so forth. And not only that, you also may probably be producing air emission in the process. So maybe if you're using generators, you may have air emission. This is how you interact with your environment. You'd probably say, hey, we're just a small office. We're a group of about 10 to 20 people, and we're just basically all working on administrative or clerical activities. We don't have any environmental aspects. Wrong. As a matter of fact, right now, we are interacting with the environment. Tell me, how do we interact with the environment right now? Please, if I may ask, how do you think are we interacting at this very moment with the environment? Like we're doing this webinar, we're talking with one another using this video conferencing tool. Aren't we using energy? So we're also contributing to depletion of energy. Now, you probably have pen and paper with you. So you're using paper as well. You are contributing to resource depletion. You'd probably be generating waste after this. Where do you throw that waste? So you are affecting, probably contaminating land and water. Our activities interact with the environment. So aspects and impacts is defined by ISO 14000. Environmental aspect, this is an element of your activities or products or service. Let's say, for example, you have procurement. That's an activity. It interacts with the environment. Let's say, for example, you have maintenance. That's an activity. It interacts with the environment. Let's say you're into construction and you're doing excavation. That is an activity that also interacts with the environment. Do you generate waste? Yes, it interacts with the environment. Whether that interaction is positive or negative, whether it's adverse or beneficial, whether it's actual or potential, your activity is interacting with the environment. So the first thing you need to do here is to identify what are all these activities and see and evaluate whether in what way are they interacting with the environment. And speaking of interacting with the environment, these aspects have impacts. Impacts as defined here are changes to the environment. Like I said, whether adverse or beneficial. Simply put, environmental aspects are source, environmental impacts are targets. Environmental aspects are cause, environmental impacts are effect. So again, cause and effect to easily understand this. So in other words, your organization, no matter how big or small, is causing whether adverse or beneficial impact to the environment. Environmental aspects, like I said, are sources. They can be your emission to air, releases to water, your generation of waste. Maybe you're also using generator, as mentioned earlier, so you are producing noise. And we've already said that you're using raw materials. Again, environmental aspects are any activities within your organization that may interact with your environment. Now, going back to your QMS. In your QMS, you have identified all these activities. You have identified all these processes. Now, if you're implementing EMS, what you're going to do with those processes is this. You need to identify how those processes are interacting with the environment in terms of this. Go back to those activities that you have identified in your QMS and see what are environmental aspects there. After you have identified your environmental aspects, you now can check and determine what are the environmental impacts. So impacts are, again, effects. So First things first, environmental impacts, air pollution. Are those activities contributing to ozone depletion, global warming, or maybe acid rain? Another impact of those activities may be water pollution, drain contamination, sewer pollution, even sea pollution if you're discharging waste to any bodies of water. Land pollution. So you have soil contamination, even loading landfill potential. And of course, lastly, you have resource depletion because of course you're using resources. Like we said, we're using energy right now, electricity. So we can contribute to the depletion of fuel, water, forest, and so on and so forth. So think of these 4 different impacts of those activities that you have identified. So that's just to quickly recap. Environmental aspects are activities of your products and services. Identify them. Second, know what are their impacts to the environment. Impacts can either be air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, or resource depletion. Let's separate this, aspects and then impacts. You look into your operations and activities. So go back to your QMS, go back to the list of those processes. What are those procedures enrolled in your QMS? Look at the operations, look at the activities. What about materials, energy sources, and other sources? And then you may also want to look at emissions to air. Do you have this in your processes? Discharges to land and water. Do you have this in those activities when you do your business? Maybe you have a canteen, motor pool, or a warehouse, or even just the office, admin, back office staff that generate waste. You may even have scrap if you're into production, or off-spec materials, or we call that rejects. So we generate that within our operations. What's the effect of these operations and activities to air, to water, to land, to flora, fauna, and these impacts, are they actual or potential? And in evaluating the impacts, you should also look at the magnitude or degree of these impacts. Is it severe? Will it create an irreparable damage to the environment, to the community, or is it minor? Or will this impact be regulated, or is it regulated, by the way? You'd also would like to know about the frequency or likelihood. How often are we doing this activity, or what's the likelihood of this impact happening? And then, of course, you may also want to look at the duration and the geographic area. The duration, if you're going to create this adverse impact, for how long will it affect the community or the environment, and what specific geographical locations will it affect? Do you also have concerns from interested parties? Are you receiving complaints from the community that your operations is noisy, that you're emitting smoke, and all of a sudden they have all this skin disease, and so on and so forth? So this is how you evaluate these impacts. So aspects and impacts. Again, aspects are sources, impacts are effects. To simplify that, all these aspects are coming or elements of your activities. Look for these elements in your processes and evaluate that impacts. Now, for example, let's take a look at washing, car washing. Again, I've identified this example because I know all of you are coming from a lot of different industries. Yes, I can see comment in the group chat. Yes, very good. Impact to human should be considered in evaluating the impact. Thank you for sharing. But let's take a look at this. Activity, service, car washing. So let's say you have a fleet of vehicles, or you may have one single vehicle that you use in your delivery. What's the environmental aspect? Cleaning agent in water. You're using water. And what's the impact of that to the environment? You will be contributing potentially to water pollution, or you have, of course, impact to natural resources. What about heating? Do you have heating? Emissions from your boiler if you're using that in your operations. Hence, you contribute to air pollution. What about storage of fuel in above or underground tank? You're using that. Maybe there's a potential for leakage or spill. That's an aspect, and the effect of that to the environment is, of course, contamination of soil and water. This is a simple example here. So what you can do is identify all those activities within your organization and see what are its corresponding environmental aspects first, and how does it affect or interact with the environment. As soon as you have identified that, the next logical step here is for you to assess the risk. So assuming you have, for example, you have about 50 activities or 50 processes, put that in a matrix like this you can see on your screens, and identify each of the environmental aspects based on those activities. It doesn't have to be focused only on operations or productions. The tendency here is that most process owners would say that, we're just, sitting here in front of the laptop. What possible environmental aspects do we have anyway? Identify, include those activities in the matrix, all those activities in your organization, because whether big or small, I'm telling you, they have environmental aspect. They may also have potential environmental impact, or even actual environmental impact. As soon as you have identified the environmental aspects and environmental impacts, the next step here is for you to assess it. So this is now where we assess the impact. How severe is the impact to the environment? So you may want to use a simple assessment matrix like this. Impact meaning 0 if it's low risk, 3 if it's very high or high risk. And likelihood, low meaning it's least likely to happen, or high if it's very likely to happen. And you see right away that everything that falls into the red box is high priority or a significant environmental aspects and impacts, and hence you need to control that. Similar to your QMS, this is basically risk assessment as well. So when you do your risk assessment, it follows the simple process of identifying all this risk from all the different processes that you have. The date of the risk occurring, you can describe what is this environmental risk, and you can score it in terms of low, medium, or high. Like I said, simplify it. What's your mitigation action now? How do you control it? Your risk register is basically your universe of risk. Not all are created equal. You need to prioritize which are significant risks. Hence, you need to do the risk assessment. Let's take a look at an example here. Again, going back to the car washing activity. Like we said, the aspect is using water. There's cleaning agent in the water, and the impact, of course, will affect natural resources. There's potential water pollution. Using that risk matrix I have showed to you a while ago, using severity and likelihood, let's say we'll score it as 4. Using a scale of 1 to 5. Let's say severity is 4, and then likelihood is 3. In the scale of 1 to 5, likelihood is 3. So it's not really most likely to happen, so we'll just write it as 3. Severity is quite serious, so we'll put it as 4. And then RPN is risk priority number. You multiply severity times the likelihood, you get 12. In your RPN, you also need to classify, when we say 12, what do we mean by 12? Is it medium risk or high risk? So let's say, for example, 1 to 5 would be low, then 5 to 15 is medium, then 15 to, let's say, 125 is, or 25 is high. Then this is medium risk. And so what are you going to do with this? If you can see the last column, it says there RTP. RTP stands for risk treatment plan. So how are you going to treat this environmental risk? Are you going to now come up with engineering controls, administrative controls, whatever that is, to ensure that you address or manage this significant risk in your assessment? Once you have completed these activities, you will be able to complete environmental aspects impacts matrix. Now, where did I get this 4? Where did I get this 3 and 5? This is something that you need to design yourselves. So when you say 4, what do we mean by that? You may also want to say, okay, it's 4 severe because it may probably incur losses of around, say, 100,000. You can put these value into your ranking from 1 to 5 so that it's easy for you to objectively measure and assess the ranking that you're going to do when you do your environmental aspects and impacts made. This is not just a number that you pick out of thin air and say, okay, let's do it, let's put it there. So you cannot do it subjectively. You need to assess it objectively. I would suggest do it using a cross-functional team, and then so you can really accurately assess the severity of these environmental impacts. Is it most likely to happen? What's the risk priority number? Now, what are the benefits of this? First of all, of course, is that of cost saving. If you're going to implement ISO 14001:2015, obviously there will be effective cost savings on your part with greater emphasis on efficient use of resources, by the way, efficient use of waste and energy management. Why is that? Because the moment you see that you have significant RTPs or significant RPNs, no? RPNs again stand for risk priority number. With those RPNs, you're also prescribed by the ISO 14001 to create OTPs, objectives, targets, and programs. So these objectives, targets, and programs should be measurable, attainable. So for example, your objective now is to reduce energy consumption by 10% at the end of fourth quarter 2020 or at the end of this pandemic, whatever that is. You need to specify that specific, measurable environmental objective, targets, and programs. So it will definitely affect and improve your bottom line. Second, there you can see is there's also benefit as far as quantity monitoring and control of the impact of your operations. If right now you don't have any idea how your operation affects your environment, this one will give you a clear picture of how do you interact with the environment. Ensure legislative awareness and compliance as well. As we all know, we have a long list of environmental compliances, regulatory requirements, statutory requirements. This will also guide you in coming up with effective corporate social responsibility plans. Of course, making you a responsible organization in sustaining, coming up with a sustainable business plan as far as your environment is concerned. Yesterday, we were auditing one of our clients, and we went to this pump station and only to find out that their generator doesn't even have a permit to operate. So when you have a system like this, you get to have an idea of what are legal, regulatory, and statutory requirements. And of course, lastly, is that of increased market credibility and improved corporate image.